A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards, as you can see right there, at Cam Edwards on Twitter. Cam.edwards@bearingarms.com is the email address if you would like to contact me that way. Welcome to the program. Coming up in just a matter of minutes, my friend Tony Katz from WIBC in Indianapolis, Indiana is going to be with us. I'm curious, and I want to get your thoughts as well. You can tweet me, you can send me an email. One of the things I want to talk with Tony Katz about is whether or not he is seeing any sort of shift on the ground there in Indiana in terms of support for gun control. Is he hearing from anybody who says, you know, listen, I used to be all in favor of the Second Amendment, but now I don't know, you know, these red flag laws make sense, or maybe why do you need a 20-round magazine, or why do you need one of these battlefield weapons of war? Why can't we just ban these guns? And I'd love to know if you're running into that in your world as well, whether it's, a friend, a neighbor, coworker, somebody who knows that you're a Second Amendment supporter, who's, coming to you and saying, listen, I used to be the same way. Like 3 weeks ago, I felt the same way, but then El Paso happened and Dayton happened, and I just don't know why we can't have these common sense gun laws on the books. And so if you are seeing that, let me know. I'd also be very curious to know how you're responding to anybody that is telling you that. Now, I confess, I've not seen this in my world. I really haven't, but there's and we'll talk about it in just a minute. There's all kinds of polling out suggesting that there's been this dramatic shift here in support of gun control laws. It's not a dramatic shift, but we do have a Republican who has signed on to the quote unquote assault weapons ban that the House will be considering here in a little bit more than a month. New York Congressman Peter King, who I have to say has not been a huge Second Amendment supporter in the past. Like, it does not surprise me that Peter King has signed on to this gun and magazine ban. Peter King has been opposed to, he's been supportive of things like the no-fly, no-buy bill in the past, legislation that was opposed not only by the NRA, but by the ACLU. So he's not exactly a Second Amendment stalwart, but he is the first Republican to sign on. So now, as my colleague Tom Knighton at Bearing Arms points out, Democrats will be able to say, look, we've got bipartisan support for this sweeping gun and magazine ban. And one of the reasons, again, maybe not why Peter King is showing support for a gun ban, but there was Representative Kinzinger, right, from Wisconsin last week, another Republican. Don't know if he's formally signed on as a sponsor of this ban, but he did come out and say, I'd like to raise the age to purchase a firearm to 21. Don't know why anybody needs these, battlefield weapon of war. And I think it's because, again, a lot of these politicians, maybe they've had a legit change of heart. Maybe. But I kind of doubt it in many cases. I think instead what is happening is they're seeing stories like this. And they're seeing polling like this. This is from Vox today. Suburban women want Congress to act on gun control. Republican poll finds. They note that suburban women were Republicans' weak spot in the 2018 midterms. They're seeing evidence in swing districts that these suburban women are really, really supportive of gun control laws, and they want to see something done. And so there is a desire by politicians who want to get reelected to do something. My question is it that these swing voters in these swing districts, do they really want gun control, or do they want something done? And what they're hearing is gun control. Because I think one of the things that Second Amendment activists and supporters have been not so great at, we're really good at saying, listen, here's why a quote-unquote assault weapons ban doesn't make sense. Here's why these red flag laws have problems. Here's why universal background checks are unenforceable. And that's a big part of what we have to do, right? But if you are somebody who is getting a steady media diet, and not just from the news media, but from social media as well, you're getting a steady diet of scary stories about your kid could be next, you can hear somebody say, okay, here's why a gun ban doesn't work. Here's why background checks are unenforceable. Here's why red flag laws have all of these, due process concerns. And that may register with you, but that doesn't do any, even acknowledging those things doesn't do anything to help you feel safer, right? Or to help you feel like your kid is going to be safe when they go to school. I thought about this the other day as I saw a tweet from the Trace that was about a story where students and teachers are actually writing out wills in class in case they are shot by an active assailant there while they're at school. And of course, the Trace was happy to promote this. The news media happy to promote this. I actually wrote a piece at Bearing Arms, published this morning, Gun Control and the Politics of Fear, that kind of delves into this. You know, gun control activists claim all the time that it's the gun lobby that stokes fear, right? Oh, you Second Amendment types, you're just out there. You want people to be freaked out. You want people to be freaked out about crime, so they'll go out and buy a gun. You want people to freak out about the possibility of gun control, so they'll go out and they'll buy a gun. So you're stoking fear just to sell guns and ammo. That's the claim, anyway. And yet I've noticed gun control advocates are stoking a lot of fear. Whether it's the Gun Violence Archive reporting that there have been more mass shootings than days of the year, and the media breathlessly reporting this, even though in order to derive that figure, they have to, greatly expand what amounts to a quote-unquote mass shooting. Americans believe that violent crime is on the increase, even though violent crimes declined by about 50% since the early 1990s. They think that these types of active assailant attacks are becoming more frequent. Reason magazine just did a podcast with James Allen Fox from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, who says, no, we're not in the middle of an epidemic of these types of shootings. But every time one of these shootings happens, we can expect nonstop media coverage for days on end. And it's interesting because gun control groups, actually the Trace, which is funded by Bloomberg, has partnered with Columbia Journalism Review, and they're going to be developing guidelines, they say, for media reporting on these types of active assailant incidents. And the goal, they say, and I think it's a laudable goal, is to change the coverage so that the perpetrators of these attacks don't gain infamy or fame, which could lead to copycat style attacks or attacks that are inspired by previous attacks. I think that's a real thing. The contagion effect, I believe, is absolutely real. And I think it's a very good thing for the media to think about how they cover these things. I don't think it's enough for the news outlets to do this. Part of it now in the era of social media is we're all our own little publishers, right? We all have to be thinking about how we are reacting and how we are responding so that these individuals don't gain fame or perhaps infamy. But even beyond that, there is another issue that the Trace and Columbia Journalism Review, at least so far, have failed to recognize. And that is this: does the media coverage of these types of attacks stoke fear unnecessarily? And of course, gun control groups would say, no, of course not. People should be terrified. They should be scared. I've got a graphic from Our World in Data, and it's in this story that I wrote for Bearing Arms. And it's a really fascinating graphic. You may have seen it. It was going around social media a few days ago. Causes of death in the United States versus the media coverage of causes of death in the United States. Homicides, all homicides in the United States make up less than 1% of deaths in this country. And active assailant homicides make up less than 1% of all homicides. So we're talking again about a very, very, very tiny number. And yet the media coverage of these types of attacks is exponentially higher. In fact, the media coverage of homicides in general is exponentially higher. Less than 1% of all deaths in this country. And yet, according to Our World in Data, stories and coverage of homicides make up about 22% of media coverage. About 1/5 of all media stories involve homicides, even though homicides make up less than 1% of all deaths in this country. Now, look, I'm not saying that these active assailant attacks are not newsworthy. They absolutely are. Because they are so rare, they shock us every time one of these types of attacks occur. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about these types of attacks. I think we absolutely should. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to mitigate these types of attacks. Of course we should. But I think that the media and gun control groups are not providing any sort of context. And in fact, I don't think they want to. I think they want people to be scared. I think the media wants people to be terrified because that keeps people watching, keeps people tuning in. And I think gun control groups want Americans to be scared because they believe that helps them get votes. You know, we've talked before about the response by gun control groups to these sort of active assailant attacks. High-profile gun violence incidents is how they refer to them in their playbook, Preventing Gun Violence Through Effective Messaging. And gun control groups have known for years now that when one of these events happens, they need to take to the airwaves. They need to call for gun control. Don't get specific, but call for gun control. Make that emotional connection. And hopefully that will lead to engagement later on. They're not interested in a reasonable, calm discussion about what may or may not work, because that's not their goal. Their goal is to put more gun laws on the books. And if they can do that, if they feel the best way to do that is, again, to make people terrified, then they'll do it. At Barry Arms, I've got another example of Brady with a new video out. It's about 2 minutes long. I've got a link to it at the story. And it's basically a father getting his daughter ready for school. And before they walk out the door, he slips on a bullet-resistant vest over his daughter's, chest before he puts her on the bus. And again, it's not real subtle, right? This message of you should be terrified every time your kid goes to school. You want to put a vest on them so you know that they're safe. We don't have to live this way. If we just pass gun control, then you won't have to. That's the simple message. Unfortunately, they're wrong. Even Joe Biden talking the other day about how the quote-unquote assault weapons ban in the 1990s was a big success. We actually saw the modern era of school shootings begin during that last gun ban. As Malcolm Gladwell pointed out in a New Yorker article a couple of years ago, it began in 1996. And then Columbine happened in 1999. Well, the quote-unquote assault weapons ban went into effect in 1990. It was passed in 94, went into full effect in 95. So while that ban is in place, you actually start to see the era of school shootings begin. Not really sure how you can say that that was a unqualified success, but apparently if we get a bigger, badder ban this time, it'll work out differently. So is all of this media coverage that stokes fear, the amplification of that coverage by gun control groups, is it having an impact? I talked with Tony Katz from WIBC in Indianapolis, Indiana, about what he is seeing there on the ground in Indiana's capital city. Take a look and a listen. Well, Tony, thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program. It's good seeing you today.
Good to see you.
So I'm curious, and I'm kind of taking the pulse of people around the country to see if anything on the ground has really changed in terms of the gun control debate. We had, protests / rallies held by gun control groups around the country over the weekend. I saw that there were dozens in attendance in New York City, which doesn't seem like a great turnout. You all had something there in Indy, did you not?
Yeah, Moms Demand Action decided to get the mayor here, who's in a re-election bid, Joe Hogsett, to come out. I've seen different reports, but maybe they had a couple hundred people out here, which I think would be pretty typical and pretty standard for them. But aside from the political cravenness of supporting Moms Demand Action, I can't say there's any palpable move on gun control. I know what the president has to say. I know he fiddles around with further background check conversations, but doesn't give specifics. But if there's any idea that people in Indiana or people where I reach in the Midwest are really moving on gun control, I haven't seen proof of it. I do think that that's different than whether or not Mitch McConnell is going to be in favor of some type of legislation when they get back because they want this issue out of the way for a 2020 election. But on the ground, the people, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, and that kind of, tracks with what I'm seeing here in Virginia as well. So let's talk politics for a second, because I think that you're right. I think that there is, and I think Mitch McConnell even he said something last week about, we want to do something. We want to get something done. And I think you're right. They do want to be able to point to some sort of legislative accomplishment. The thing is, though, I don't know that that's really going to make the issue go away. I mean, when you look at what Democrats are calling for, if Republicans in the Senate go along with, let's say, a red flag bill or some sort of expansion to background checks, let's say Manchin Toomey, Democrats aren't going to be satisfied. No. They're going to be out there demanding an assault weapons ban, gun licensing, magazine bans. In fact, the House is going to be voting on a mag and gun ban in the first week of September. So, if the Republicans pass some sort of watered down gun control bill, does that actually help them or hurt them, you think?
I think it depends on what it is, right? The whole do something crowd is a really weird crowd. What a strange thing for people to want. We want our government to do something. Well, do something to you is different than do something to me is different than do something to somebody else. So therefore, government thinks it has to do everything. And me, I'm already doing something. I'm carrying a firearm. I'm not one of these people waiting for government to save me. I'm actually doing everything I can to ensure that to the best of my ability, I can save myself. That's doing something. And that gets completely lost in the conversation. But the idea that they will pass something, well, that's different, right? Because all politics are local, and this is a political conversation that we're having. So will it be this, what you're talking about? No, I don't think it's going to be about a magazine ban. I don't think you're going to get Republicans to go down that road. But something in that red flag law world, which can be very, very frightening, I think that's where you're going to see their first step, their first foray to try and not only pacify, but actually say, you know what, we should help those people who need the help because they've got a family member or somebody else. And this is where the red flag law guy, I think, gets interesting. I think you and I disagree on certain parts of this. I don't want anybody having their rights taken away. I don't want anybody not given due process. But if we're going to tell a family, hey, you knew that your son or your daughter or whatever was a problem, you didn't do anything, we might actually want to give them the tools to be able to help their son or daughter protect themselves and others. I think that's a legitimate conversation, and I think that's the place where you might see some movement.
And you and I have had these conversations, and my attitude is, look, I don't think these red flag laws are coming from a place of let's take everybody's guns away. I do think that they are attempts to address exactly what you said, dangerous people in a very dangerous, critical time. And I even get that this is an attempt to be as unobtrusive as possible. But I guess that's where one of my problems comes in. We saw police around the country say that 3 attacks were thwarted this past weekend. And in none of the 3 cases was a red flag law used, even though at least one of these incidents took place in a state with a red flag law on the books. Instead, the existing criminal justice system was used. The existing civil commitment laws were used. And so one of the things that I've been asking supporters of a red flag law is, give me a scenario where a red flag law or an emergency violence protection order is the more appropriate response than using the existing civil commitment laws or using the existing criminal justice system. And honestly, I'm still waiting for somebody to give me an example.
And I think that's a good response, right? I saw your tweet in regards to Senator Marco Rubio about what he wants to put forward as a red flag law. And one of the things this gets to is, we need to have a conversation about red flag laws. Well, for people on the political left very often, conversation is you agree with me, right? You do what I want. You do what I say. That's conversation. That's not it. Here's Marco Rubio, that's the Republican senator from Florida, who put forth this idea. And here's you, Cam Edwards, saying, here's the list of problems with that idea. Let's address these. That's a conversation. Now, your point is a different point and also equally valuable. You can have more red flag laws, but here are great examples of things that don't fall into that category. That leads the political left to, this is why we need to ban firearms. And that leads the free and thinking people to saying, never once in history has a group of people been better off because we've taken away their rights. And that's the conversation that continues.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I appreciate you continuing the conversation with us, sir. It is always good talking with you, and hope we get to have you back on again soon.
Anytime.
Tony Katz joins us from WIBC in Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, tomorrow on Cam and Company, Jesse Kelly, talk show host down in Houston, Texas, will be joining us. I want to ask Jesse that very same question we talked with Tony about. Got a couple of other questions for Jesse as well. He always asks the most random questions when I'm on his radio show, so I got to think of a couple of really random questions to ask Jesse while he's here tomorrow. Right now, though, let's get to our Armed Citizen Story. Let's get to our good deed of the day, and of course, another failure of the criminal justice system, this time from the Keystone State of Pennsylvania, where a parolee allegedly led troopers on a car chase through Northampton County. Devin Cosme is his name. He is on parole right now in Lackawanna County, pleaded guilty back on August the 5th to harassment in Northampton County, where he was sentenced to a 1-year probation. And it was over the weekend when officers, at least an officer, spotted Cosme behind the wheel of a car, traveling about 89 miles an hour down a 2-lane road. Chase ensued. Eventually, Cosme stopped. He got out of the car. He tried to flee. He was arrested. They did find a small baggie of pot and a pill inside the car. They also found an open bottle of whiskey there in the back seat. That's a no-no. And right by the driver's side door, they found a 9mm handgun that had been reported stolen from a nearby township. So Cosme's back in jail now. He's facing 14 different charges, $35,000 bail for Cosme. He's already under court supervision. He actually is out on bond right now for another incident. Had to, put up 10% of a $10,000 bond for a case in which he's accused of smashing a car window with a rock near where his kids were sitting. And as it turns out, Cosme has been well known to authorities since he was 17 years of age. That's how old he was when he was charged with a shooting at a public housing project in Easton, Pennsylvania. He ended up copping a plea to a lesser charge, sentenced to 40 to 80 months in the state pen, got out. He was charged, I believe, in 2015 with another shooting, but after witnesses changed their story, prosecutors had to drop the charges. Then in 2017, he was actually shot as part of a drug deal gone bad where he was supposed to be selling 500 Xanax pills. And, we've got the Virginia Crime Commission meeting. It met yesterday in Richmond, and meets today in Richmond. And yesterday, I've got a piece up at bearingarms.com that I would encourage you to take a look at. David Kennedy, who is with the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, had a great presentation to lawmakers where he talked about this, that the vast majority of Americans will never, ever commit a violent crime. The vast majority of gun owners will never, ever commit a violent crime. The vast majority of guns will never be used in a violent crime. And as it turns out, those who are most likely to be the perpetrators of violent crime, particularly in urban areas, are also most likely to be victims of violent crime. It is a vicious cycle and a vicious circle, which is one of the reasons why David Kennedy and others have put together things like Project Ceasefire, which uses law enforcement resources to identify the most violent gang in any given area and the most violent offenders within that gang, because they are the real drivers of violence. And once those individuals have been identified, then they can be singled out for targeted enforcement. And the message that delivered is really simple. You're going to stop shooting people. One way or the other. You're going to stop shooting people. We'll help you if you'll let us, but we will make you if you won't. So we will take your cases to federal court, and you won't get a plea bargain, and you'll go away for 20, 30 years the next time you so much as violate your probation. But on the other hand, if you agree that you want to stop shooting people and you don't really want to live this lifestyle, that you want to live past age 22, you don't want to end up dead on the street somewhere, hey, you know what? We can help you with that too. We got all sorts of resources within the community. Here's your former, elementary school principal who's willing to help out. Here's a pastor in Neighbor Church that's willing to help out. We can help you get your GED. We can help you get into college. We can help you get a job. We can help you do these things to make you a productive member of society. You have to want to do it. And if you don't want to do it, then again, we got to take you off the streets because we're tired of you shooting people. And in Virginia, we've got legislation that's been introduced now. It's House Bill 4032 that would empower cities to actually put programs like this in place so that individuals like Mr. Cosme there would not be allowed to continue to be a part of this cycle and this circle of violence. Now, our armed citizen story of the day from Phenix City, Alabama, where a jewelry store owner forced to defend himself after two armed robbers came into his store, broad daylight, masked and armed, and the jewelry store owner fired shots. The pair took off running. Local DA there in Phenix City had to remind folks that, yes, if guys come into your store and they've got their guns flashing and they've got masks on and you're in fear for your life, yeah, you can defend yourself and your employees, as this jewelry store owner did. Suspects did take off. Apparently, they left their car behind. Police say there's no indication that the car was stolen, but they also haven't made any arrests yet. So hopefully that vehicle will give them at least one lead going forward. I'm glad to see that nobody was injured. The store owner's okay. Employees are okay as well. And close call for a boater out on Lake Erie. Take a look at this picture. This is a sinking sailboat is what that is. And the owner of that sailboat was apparently perched on top of his sinking craft for about 11 hours or so, according to the Sandusky Register, which says the crew of a local charter fishing boat saved the gentleman who had been clinging to that sailboat through the night. Captain Eric Langemeyer was taking a charter out. They were going to do some fishing for perch when he said he saw a flashing light in the distance. As they got closer, he thought it was like an overturned jet ski, but as they got closer, he could see there was a boat. So they were able to pull the guy on board. Captain Langemeyer says, among the customers that he had on the craft, he said he had some firefighters, some retired law enforcement, and they actually gave up the clothes on their back to help this guy get some dry clothes. They radioed for the Coast Guard. Coast Guard came out and picked up the gentleman, and Captain Langemeyer and his crew was able to, and customers able to continue on with their charter. Hopefully it was a great day catching fish, but it was a fantastic day in terms of helping out somebody in need. So in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. Captain Eric Langemeyer and the crew there of that fishing charter in Sandusky, Ohio, we thank you for your good deed. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Thank you for being a part of the program. Remember, if you like this in podcast form, you get kind of tired of staring at this ugly mug, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and, of course, townhall.com podcast. You can also subscribe if you like staring at this ugly mug. You can subscribe on YouTube, Town Hall Media. You can get the latest editions each and every day. Again, tomorrow, Jesse Kelly's going to join us. We'll have more of the day's top stories, more armed citizen stories for you, another good deed, and, of course, as always, because we never run out of those stories from the failed criminal justice system. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you here soon with more Bearing Arms Cam and Company.